Homelessness it just exploded since the 80s, and in the last 10 years it's gone nuts since the financial crisis and the housing crash in '08. And I've been saying we can fix homelessness. It's not that hard. It just takes political will, but there isn't any political will because homeless people don't vote, I guess, or have money to donate. That's the real power. The power doesn't come from, it comes from the ability to donate to a candidate. And so they figured out in Finland, and they also figured out in a state in the United States. There's a state in the United States that has figured out how to fix homelessness, and I'm gonna tease that because you'll never guess which state it is. Now that I said that, I bet you all guessed it. Finland ends homelessness and provides shelter for all in need. So the answer to how you end homelessness is already in the headline. It's already there. You know how you end homelessness? You provide shelter for everyone. You give people homes. What? How did they do it? Well, here's from the article. In Finland, the number of homeless people has fallen sharply. The reason? The country applies housing first concept. Huh? What does that mean? Well, those affected by homelessness receive a small apartment and counseling. So you create all those jobs for the people who had to build that apartment, and you create jobs for all those counselors. It's like a jobs program. Investing in our country turns out to be a jobs program. So those affected by homelessness receive a small apartment and counseling without any preconditions. Because the thing they do now is they go, well, you have to go get clean and sober before we'll give you a house. So keep running around the city all hopped up on the goofballs with a mental disease and poor. So just go ahead. That'll help our community. So they decided to stop doing that. And just no matter what condition they're in, you offer them housing and counseling. 4 out of 5 people affected who go through that, you're given counseling, giving an apartment. 4 out of 5 of them make their way back to a stable life. 4 out of 5. That's 80%. I just did the math in my head. Check me. I'm not a math surgeon. And all of this, but Jimmy, how much will that cost? It's cheaper than not doing it. What? Just like giving everybody health care is cheaper than the way we're doing it. How could that be? It is. How does hot water freezes faster than cold? Yes. All this is cheaper than accepting homelessness. So we could do it. How do you do it? You go build apartment complexes for homeless people. You put them in there and you give them counseling. And then you take care of that problem, and then you work on all their other problems after that. But the first thing you do is you give them an apartment. And then you work on the rest of their problems. And guess what? This works for 4 out of 5 people. Do you want to know the story of the worst state in America? Do you know which state did this? The answer just may surprise you. Here we go.
Mississippi usually ranks among the worst in the United States.
Mississippi usually ranks among the worst in the United States in terms of education.
In terms of education, poverty, public health, or crime. But there's one metric that Mississippi ranks the best in. They have the lowest rate of homelessness out of any state.
Huh?
This is because, despite their poverty and racism and so on, Mississippi goes the Finland route for solving the homeless problem. They build houses and they put people in them. Good job, Mississippi. Contrast this with the wealthy, liberal, high IQ California, with a homeless rate more than 11 times the rate of the supposedly backwards, gun-toting redneck states. For whatever reason, California will do anything to reduce the homeless population, except build more houses, and as a result, their state just gets worse and worse. Zoning laws prevent anyone from building houses more than 3 stories tall, and when new houses and buildings are proposed, the plans can be shot down by angry residents so long as they act angry enough. The population of San Francisco has basically stayed the same since 1960, but rents are through the roof because every time a home is demolished or otherwise taken off the market, a new one can't be built to fill the gap. When California passed rent control measures in the 90s, it actually led to renters paying collectively $2.9 billion more than they had been paying before. New constructions and luxury houses were exempt from the rent control, so landlords simply converted.
So I experienced this. My apartment on Hollywood Boulevard, in the nice part of Hollywood Boulevard, was rent controlled. It was a suite apartment. It was a 2-flat. I lived on the second floor. I even had a view. You know how much I paid in Los Angeles? $750. I paid for that 1-bedroom, huge kitchen, huge dining room, and a living room, plus a bedroom. It was a big apartment. It had a big nice view. I paid $750 a month because it was rent controlled. And then the guy made me an offer to move out. And you know why he made me an offer to move out? Because he was going to be able to then turn my apartment into a luxury rental, which would no longer be subjected to the rent control laws, which is exactly what he did. Just what they said here. So they got rid of a rent control. So you can get rid of a rent control apartment if you turn it into a luxury apartment, and then it no longer goes under the rent control. So the rent control law, which again, it's the unintended consequences. The rent control law sounds like a good thing. The answer, it turns out, according to this video and these studies, isn't rent control. The answer is more housing. Well, we'll keep going.
Existing housing into luxury houses, obtained the new building sticker, and proceeded to increase the rent while not actually adding any more houses to the total, and in fact taking away from the number of affordable houses.
So according to this, when they passed rent control, it actually it encouraged people to get rid of affordable housing and build luxury housing. And that's what's been happening.
Sometimes it can take years just to get government permission to demolish old buildings and turn them into new homes or apartments. All the while, developers are paying property tax, hiring security, and paying for maintenance, inflating the price of the apartments when they finally do get built, so builders can make back their losses. The effect this has on Californian society is terrible. These mediocre houses sell for millions.
Millions!
People who have a salary of $140,000 per year still qualify for government assistance to pay their rent and mortgage. Do you want to visit the Walk of Fame? Too bad, it's a makeshift homeless shelter now. San Francisco City Hall? Well, they turned it into an actual homeless shelter. Chinatown? Watch out for the heroin needles in your wonton soup. Here's a fun game. Put yourself on Google Street View anywhere in central LA and see how long it takes you to find a homeless tent. It's honestly scarier than Alien Isolation. Not only is this housing and homeless crisis a great humanitarian disaster, but it's also taking a hit on the Californian economy. A lot of the wealth generated by Silicon Valley is just vacuumed up by landlords due to high rents. The once thriving film industry is now relocating elsewhere, with the state of Georgia and the UK predicted to have more film studios than Hollywood by 2025. California is a warning bell for every other major city in the Western world. The fate of California will be the fate that befalls your town, your city, and your country if you don't solve the housing crisis.
And how do you solve the housing crisis? It turns out you build more houses. That's how you do it. So instead of sending $40 billion to Ukraine, you send $40 billion to the cities in America and tell them to build more housing. And hire counselors. And that's how you solve homelessness. You don't have cops come in and sweep them out. You don't arrest them. You don't move them to another part of the city. You don't tear down their tents. You offer them housing and counseling. In 2008, you could see tent villages and huts standing between trees and in the parks of Helsinki. Homeless people had built makeshift homes in the middle of Finland's capital city. They were exposed to harsh weather conditions, so it was like downtown LA, but with elf people. Since the 1980s, Finnish governments had been trying to reduce homelessness. Short-term shelters were built. Now, that's what the guy who's going to become the LA mayor wants to do. He wants to build more short-term shelters and warehouse these people. That doesn't work. What does work? Long-term homeless people are still left out when you build short-term homeless things. So there were too few emergency shelters, and many affected people did not manage to get out of homelessness. They couldn't find jobs. Why? Because you can't get a job unless you have an address. And without any job, they couldn't find a flat, an apartment. It was a vicious cycle. You see this? So if you're living in temporary shelter, you don't have an address, you can't get a job, you can't get an apartment, so you can't get out of this cycle. Okay, so you got that? And hang on, make sure. Furthermore, they had problems applying for social benefits, and all in all, homeless people found themselves trapped. But in 2008, the Finnish government introduced a new policy for homeless, and what was that? It was called Housing First. Since then, the number of people affected has fallen sharply. Actually, they just built houses and put the people in them and then helped them and helped those people and then actually cut costs. Non-governmental organizations such as the Y Foundation provide housing for people in need in Finland. They take care of the construction themselves. They buy apartments on the private housing market, and then they renovate existing apartments. The apartments have 1 to 2 rooms. In addition to that, former emergency shelters have been converted into apartments in order to offer long-term housing. So wait a minute. There was a non-governmental organization involved in something and they weren't there to topple the government. Are you sure they're an NGO? Because that's not the NGOs I've heard of. Homeless people turn into tenants with a tenancy agreement. They also have to pay rent and operating costs. Social workers who have offices in the residential buildings help with financial issues such as applications for social benefits. Juha Kahinen is head of the Y Foundation. The NGO receives discounted loans from the state to buy housing. Additionally, social workers caring for the homeless and future tenants are paid by the state. And this all saves money. The Finnish lottery, on the other hand, supports the NGO when it buys apartments on the private housing market. The Y Foundation also receives regular loans from banks. The NGO later uses the rental income to repay the loans. That's how Housing First concept works. You give people housing first. Housing First reverses conventional homeless aid. More commonly, those affected are expected to look for a job and free themselves from their psychological problems or addictions. Only then they get help in finding accommodations. That's the wrong way to do it. The right way is you give them homes first. Housing First, on the other hand, reverses the path. Homeless people get a flat without any preconditions. Social workers help them with applications for social benefits and are available for counseling in general. In such a new, secure situation, it is easier for those affected to find a job and take care of their physical and mental health. The result? Impressive. 4 out of 5 homeless people will be able to keep their flat for a long time with Housing First and lead a more stable life. Creating housing for people costs money. In the past 10 years, 270 million euros were spent on the construction, purchase, and renovation of housing as part of the Housing First program. That doesn't sound like that much money, but maybe for Finland it is. However, as that woman with the name I can't pronounce points out, or maybe it's a man, This is far less than the cost of homelessness itself. Actually, see, this saves money. Because when people are in emergency situations, emergencies are more frequent. Assaults, injuries, breakdowns, the police, healthcare, and justice system are more often called upon to step in, and this also costs money. You know how much it costs to put a person in prison in California? 70 grand, eh? 70 grand a year. Now, what I said is you take those nonviolent people that are in prison, you give them all 50 grand a year. We're going to be saving 20 grand a year. You tell them, go get an apartment and don't do crime. And if you do crime now with your $50,000 a year stipend, we'll gladly pay for your imprisonment. Couldn't be worse than what we're doing now. 70 grand to put somebody in prison in California, eh? In comparison, Housing First is cheaper than accepting homelessness. Now the state spends 15,000 euros less per person. That's right, 15,000 euros less per homeless person than they were before this program. It saves money. Isn't it weird that helping people saves money? With 4 out of 5 people keeping their flats, Housing First is effective in the long run. In 20% of the cases, people move out because they prefer to stay with friends or relatives or because they don't manage to pay the rent. But even in this case, they are not dropped. They can apply again for an apartment and are supported again if they wish. Here's a story from the New York Times, how Houston moved 25,000 people from the streets into homes of their own. How'd they do it? I'm going to guess they built houses. Houston has gotten this far by teaming with county officials, county agencies, and persuading scores of local service providers, corporations, and charitable nonprofits, organizations that often bicker and compete with one another to row in unison. Together, they've gone all in on Housing First. You're kidding. A practice supported by decades of research that moves the most vulnerable people straight from the streets into apartments, not into shelters, and without first requiring them to wean themselves off drugs or complete a 12-step program or to find God or a job. How much would it cost to end homelessness in America? Now, they did a survey, or they did a study, and about 10 or 15 years ago, they proposed it would be $20 billion, which is the number I've always quoted. But now, since it's way later, and inflation, it's up. It's more. I think it's like $60 billion. America's cities could house everyone if they choose to. The federal government already provides housing vouchers to help some lower-income families. The families pay 30% of their monthly income towards rent. The government pays the rest. But instead of giving vouchers to everybody who needs one, the government imposes an arbitrary cap on the total spending. 3 in 4 eligible families don't get vouchers. How stupid is that? We just gave $40 billion to Ukraine. The program costs about $19 billion a year. Vouchers for all eligible households would cost an additional $41 billion a year, or roughly what we just sent to Ukraine. So we could house all those people with the money we just sent to Ukraine. Why not just send that money to the United States? The congressional budget with that. But where to get the money? Well, the government annually provides more than $70 billion in tax breaks to homeowners, including it. First of all, you could still give people that tax break. You just give $40 billion to those people. You don't have to take it from somewhere else. So this is New York Times bullshit neoliberal writing saying, well, if we want to help homeless people, we have to hurt someone else. No, you fucking don't. So fuck you, New York Times, and this is bullshit. Hey, let's take it from the people who already own home. Hey, how about we take it from fucking Wall Street? How about we take it from the billionaire who owns the New York Times? And then they give this look at this. So here's more propaganda. They give you a chart to show you, and they want to put it in context, how much the $54 billion in aid that we gave to Ukraine is. Here's 4 ways to put that figure in context. None of these are helpful. They say, look how much money we gave to Afghanistan. Look how much money we gave to Israel in the last 10 years. How about in the last year? Let's look at but no, they do it over 10 years. And look, if you look at all the money we gave Iraq, Israel, Afghanistan, Jordan, it's way nothing. And then this year, so we could solve this problem. Homelessness is easily solved. And the way you do it is you take $40 billion and you put it towards house construction or you rent vouchers, and we can do this. This isn't. So if there's 600,000 homeless people in America and you want to give them a $2,000 voucher for an apartment, isn't that like $12 billion? That's like $7 billion a year. I did the math once. It's not that much. And speaking of, I mean, $7 billion is an unbelievable amount of money, but not when you're speaking in the money that the United States government has and throws around. It's nothing. It's an afterthought. It's a rounding error. So there you go. We could fix homelessness. They just don't want to. We know how to do it. They're doing it in Mississippi. Don't you feel like a chump? And if you live in Los Angeles or New York or San Francisco or Chicago, anywhere, every city has homeless people, don't you feel like a chump? Because the people who actually run this country, the billionaires who own the politicians, don't want to fix this problem. And so it doesn't get fixed, even though it could be like that. Hey, we're doing stand-up dates: Salt Lake City, Las Vegas, Chicago, Sacramento, and then San Diego, where I'm taping my new special. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for all the tickets for all our live shows. We're coming to your town, maybe.